Sezno. The White Album is cool, and it's postmodern, and that's a lot of why it's cool. Follow me on the gram, dude. Check out my merch store also. Cool t-shirts there. I'm assuming that you've heard this album already if you clicked on this, but in case you haven't, or it's been like a long time since you have, I encourage you to return to it. The White Album is the Beatles album that sticks out to me as the one that is the most different from all the others. It is my favorite of theirs, which, needless to say, puts it very high in the running for my favorite album of all time. It is endlessly replayable. The word classic gets thrown around, but in the sense that a classic is something that you're supposed to come back to repeatedly for your entire life and get different things out of, yeah, the White Album is a classic. I've said for years that, like, you could probably learn how to write songs by just studying this album because of the breadth and the variety of what is presented here. More than their other albums, The Beatles, which is the true name of the album, shows that versatility is really the important marker of like a songwriter's work. Part of what makes the White Album so fascinating is that it can be understood as a work of postmodernism. There's a great deal of classical music from this period that is also concerned with postmodern thought. And that musical world, I think, is kind of where that term is used more often. But the White Album is one of the major examples of it in pop music. And the fact that they were so big when this came out and that this very odd album was so widely consumed makes it all the more impressive and important. I think songwriting today is greatly influenced by what the Beatles did on this album specifically. There has been discussion about this album in a postmodern lens for a while. Like the Wikipedia article refers to it as postmodern within the first paragraph. And I heard this album way before I ever understood what postmodernism was. But over the years, I've come to share that view, and it has enriched my understanding of this record. A lot of its greatness and strangeness can be unpacked by talking about it through postmodernism. Postmodern music is obviously not just one style, but more like a category of certain aesthetic tendencies. It's not easy to define simply, but I like Daniel Albright's view that three general tenets of postmodernism in music are bricolage, which is basically just collage, polystylism, and randomness. Everything I'll discuss here can basically be interpreted through these three concepts. So like, I don't have time to give all the context on the making of this album. There are numerous videos that people have made that can fill you in on all the craziness surrounding the band and the world in 1968. But suffice it to say, despite all the issues that were surrounding the band at this point, I've always heard this album as being very refreshing. It sounds fun. It's kind of their back to basics album in some respects. It sounds like the work of an exceptional band that has already climbed the highest heights of fame. And now they're just here authentically making whatever they feel like. They genuinely had nothing to prove at this point. A couple details right out the gate that make this album peculiar. This is their only double album. This is the only album they ever made that's called The Beatles, and it has no cover. Information is deliberately withheld, especially compared to the two album covers from the previous year. It's like they're asking everybody to come in with no expectations and make sense of this themselves. This album is all over the place. There are many who have and continue to criticize it for that reason. But to me, it is very obviously that way by design. They clearly knew that this was not an airtight package of hits, like some of their albums are. Everybody agrees that the White Album is filler, but nobody agrees on what the filler is, which, it can be argued, means there's no filler. The experience of this album is supposed to be rocky and inconsistent and confusing. Like, they knew that Wild Honey Pie and Why Don't We Do It in the Road are not #1 songs. The whole point is unity through disunity, which is quite a postmodern concept. Much of this artistic period is concerned with new conceptions of form. What even is a unified work of art? What are the different ways that you can derive unity? One way that postmodern artists have explored this concept is through having constituent parts of a whole be starkly different from each other, which is precisely the magic of the White Album. Here you have 30 songs that together form the widest range of styles that the Beatles ever presented to us in one package. The mixes and the arrangements are starkly different from song to song, and the order in which they're presented seems disjointed and random. The track list emphasizes differences over similarities. The White Album is a masterpiece of sequencing. It feels like they took all the songs they had and they put them on shuffle. There is a deranged humor in the contrasts that this album presents. To give a few examples of songs that sit next to each other: Birthday, Yer Blues, Mother Nature's Son, which is two super happy songs cradling a song about being suicidal. Helter Skelter, Long, 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 which is like maybe the quietest song on the album, following the literal attempt to make the loudest, noisiest song of all time. And for good measure, Revolution 9, Good Night. No big deal. Here's a fucking terrifying 8-minute sound collage. Okay, let's wrap it up, guys. Take it away, Ringo. Good night. Sleep tight. These are extreme choices, but they're brilliant because they serve to make the individual songs stick out more. And you find similar approaches on later albums that are super big like this, where like a variegated ordering of a multi-disc album. Songs in the Key of Life, Sign of the Times, but also in music history, you can find albums that take the opposite approach, in which contrasting categories of songs are kept separate from each other. My War by Black Flag, fast songs, slow songs. Heroes by David Bowie, all the rock songs, and then the instrumental ambient songs. In addition to the weirdness of the track list, though, the White Album is very postmodern in the way that it has all these fragmentary elements. This ties into bricolage, which I mentioned earlier, which is basically the assembly of a whole from a bunch of different diverse sources. Of course, I'd have to mention Revolution 9, probably the most widely distributed piece of avant-garde music ever made. It's literally a collage. It's a sound collage. Textures being built out of like these multitudes of different disconnected sounds and recordings. I actually quite like Revolution 9 also. And I could make a video on that. In addition to that, though, there's like weird transitions and non-sequiturs all over this album, most often in between songs, like that strings outro of Glass Onion, which MF Doom famously sampled on Operation Doomsday, that flamenco guitar at the start of Bungalow Bill, John talking gibberish after I'm So Tired, and also Can You Take Me Back, which is that little song that appears, it's technically part of Cry Baby Cry, and it plays before Revolution 9 starts, which is like, why is that there? There's no reason for that to be there. I'm not saying it's bad, but I am saying that it's a strange choice, and I think you're meant to recognize that it's strange. It's not a separate song. If you were listening to that on vinyl, you wouldn't be able to tell which song it's from. Is it part of Cry Baby Cry? Is it part of Revolution 9? And of course I have to bring up Helter Skelter and the bizarre fade-ins and fade-outs, which everybody thinks is a mistake when they listen to it for the first time. I feel like it's like a rite of passage for all of us. Other Beatles albums don't really have moments like this, or at least the texture and experience of the whole album is not predicated on moments like this. These like strange details that appear for like a second. And you kind of forget them once the next song begins, but upon returning to the album, you realize how many of these moments there are. Part of what happens there, I think, is they're communicating the depth of the musical world generally. And this is a useful transition that I'm using to discuss polystylism. This album famously has an immense range of styles. Rocky Raccoon is country. Helter Skelter is proto-metal, as some argue. Honey Pie is like a 1920s speakeasy song. And of course, Revolution 9 is Stockhausen. All the cliches of the Beatles are presented here in their most exaggerated forms. Like, if there's some component to the Beatles' music that you hate, you are basically guaranteed to hate a couple songs on this album. Like, if you have a problem with Paul McCartney writing silly songs, I hate to break it to you, bro, but the numerous styles are crucial to the album's success. It must be endured. I get videos recommended to me sometimes that are like, I made the best single disc version of the White Album, which regardless of their intentions, I feel like is just a pointless endeavor. Like, you're literally taking away the most important thing about the album, which is that you get like all of it. You get all of this stuff, warts and all. And nobody thinks that every song on this album is a 10 out of 10. Ironically, that's what makes this album a 10 out of 10. Polystylism is predicated on an acknowledgement by the artist that many styles exist. That styles, in a way, are like clothes that an artist can put on and take off whenever they want to. But also that using a style means that you're actively contributing to a discourse that already exists around that style. And both the artist and the consumer, ideally, are aware of this discourse, and it impacts our interpretation of the art. That was kind of a wordy way of me saying that this is the Beatles album that most effectively uses parody, both of other artists and, even more interestingly, of their own past selves. In a few cases, the songs actually make reference to other songs that actually exist in the real world, which is something new for them that must be touched on. An easy example is back in the USSR, which is famously like a Beach Boys parody, except it's not California Girls, it's Russian Girls. Don't know how lucky you are, boy. I'll return to how they talk about some other artists in a second. This album is like the example of the Beatles being self-aware. This album breaks the fourth wall. Sgt. Pepper kind of was a step in that direction with the whole like fictional band thing. And also I Am the Walrus, which is also from 67, makes reference to Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. That's where you get hints of a broken fourth wall, and that different Beatles songs can exist in the same fictional universe. Glass Onion, for me, is the instance of the Beatles breaking the fourth wall. The illusion is completely shattered on this song. I count, I think, 5 Beatles songs that this references: Strawberry Fields, I'm the Walrus, Fixing a Hole, Lady Madonna, Fool on the Hill, which even uses the recorders that they had on that song. The Walrus was Paul, maybe one of the more important lines they ever wrote. This is incredibly postmodern because the Beatles are presenting you with a song that is written with the assumption that you, the consumer, are already familiar with earlier Beatles songs. There's an awareness of the discourse that they've already contributed to. In so doing, they achieve a very postmodern idea, which is art's engagement with the art of the past. The artist is self-aware of themselves as an artist within a wider artistic culture. Like this kind of self-referencing, it didn't occur to them in 64. At that point, they're just writing songs. By 68, they're starting to engage with their own lore, their own achievements. Another song where they engage with a wider cultural discourse is Yer Blues. This is the best blues song that they ever made. Part of why that is that this is the self-aware Beatles blues song. I mean, the song is literally called Yer Blues. This song has been described as a half-satirical blues song that explores whether or not white British rock bands are capable of playing the blues convincingly. The blues as a concept is presented in this song in its most like simple, obvious form. I'm John Lennon and I've got the blues. That's what sets Yer Blues apart from the other 12-bar blues that they played over the years, from You Can't Do That and I'm Down. Yer Blues is exaggerated and it's self-aware. And the incredible thing about it is that it's super convincing. Everybody always talks about how heavy Helter Skelter is, but Yer Blues is absolutely in that discussion as well. That song fucking rips, dude. It fucking rips. Also, though, this song references Bob Dylan and a song of his, Feel So Suicidal, Just Like Dylan's Mr. Jones, which is a reference to Ballad of a Thin Man. That's actually probably my favorite Dylan song, to be honest with you. Mr. Jones being the man who knows something is happening here, but you don't know what it is. What's compelling about this is not just that it references another song that really exists in the real world, but it also provides an interpretation of that song from John Lennon, the consumer. Like, I don't think it's at all clear in the song that Mr. Jones is suicidal. As John says, there's no lyric in Ballad of a Thin Man that explicitly states that. But what we're getting there is what John Lennon thinks the song is about. And he uses it as a means to compare and describe himself according to that interpretation. So he's contributing to the discourse surrounding another artist's work by giving his take on it. This is partially a nod of respect, but it also humanizes John. He's a consumer of popular music the way that we all are. The illusion of the artist as being separate from the general public is broken a little bit more. Of course, Why Don't We Do It in the Road is also a 12-bar blues, albeit like a humorous one. Like, Paul knows that that song is completely absurd. I mean, it's more or less an exercise. It's some shit that you make up in the studio while waiting for the other band members to arrive, as is seen repeatedly in the Get Back documentary. This is pretty much like most of what I wanted to say, but I could not make a video about the White Album and not talk about Happiness is a Warm Gun, which I have long maintained is my favorite Beatles song. In some ways, it summarizes like all the postmodern tendencies of the White Album in one song. Very experimental in form. It is a kind of collage. No section in this song ever repeats once it is concluded, and thus goes against every basic Beatles songwriting rule that they had presented to us over and over on like 9 albums before this. John himself referred to this song as a kind of history of rock music. Having now lived through most of the 60s and acted as a direct contributor to the development of rock in that decade, John delivers this abstract song that summarizes a series of developments that hadn't all occurred yet at the start of his career. This is another, like, impossible song for them to have made even a few years earlier. It's equally abstract on a lyrical level. There's no consensus on what this song is actually about. People are very vocal about their theories, of course. There was a review I read one time on Rate Your Music, haha, that interpreted Warm Gun as a history of rock music, but argued that the supposed history that is presented there actually presents that history in reverse as it proceeds. That the heavier and thus newer sounding sections of the song are actually towards the beginning, and that the doo-wop at the end represents the more primordial origins and the beginning of rock history, thus presenting the history of rock in reverse. It is true, I think, that you get closer to Sabbath in the first half of the song than the second half of the song. This is all up to one's interpretation, of course, but this song does present a postmodern type artistic discussion that their earlier records do not have. That's about all I got here. I could make numerous other videos about this record, honestly. There's just too fucking much to consider here. And the classics should do that, dude. If you're curious, I've covered one of the songs on this album. I'll put it in the description. If you made it this far, thank you for watching. Appreciate you. Woohoo. Peace.